Gary, let's take a moment and say thank you to our sponsors at Fuji Sport.
Yeah, absolutely.
They've been working with us for a very long time, not only on this podcast, but also at the Academy. And I'm taking a peek at their website right now, and they have a brand new ultra light gi. Now, this is mind-blowing. I'm looking at my size. A2 is 2.75 pounds. I mean, that's under 3 pounds. That's mind-blowing.
I could even lift that. And go to their website, fujisports.com. Check it out. Anything you could need for your jiu-jitsu journey, you can find at fujisports.com.
Hey, it's been a while since we started RŌL TV project.
It's been a while since you started it. I did come in later, and I can't say enough about it, especially the new platform. It's really amazing, fully customizable, and you know a little bit more about the structure.
Well, so two things you need to know. One is the subscription service, which is $9 a month. You can get access to hundreds of videos, hundreds of drills, techniques, and so on in a very nice library categorized as you need them. But two, different lessons. You can actually purchase those individually and you own them. So the subscription is not tied to it at all. You can look at things like spider guard, half guard sweeps, half guard chokes, folding pass, and so on. There's so many of them out there. So take a look and see where you need help with the videos, right? 30% if you type in RŌL Radio as a code.
Who doesn't like saving money? Go to rolacademy.tv. What's up, everyone, and welcome back. If you haven't already, please remember to hit the like, share, subscribe, download, listen, and whatever other button there is, and leave us a review wherever you do listen. That ensures that we can continue bringing you the great guests and amazing content that you have come to expect. On this episode, we have second-degree BJJ black belt Paul Schreiner. Paul is trained with some of the biggest names in jiu-jitsu and instructed at some of the most highly regarded academies in the world. Paul shares his journey that has taken him across the globe from his time as a teenage surfer and rugby player, training with legends of jiu-jitsu while he was still a beginner, training in Brazil, and becoming an instructor at the world-famous Marcelo Garcia Academy. Here's the RŌL Radio with Claudio Franca, black belt, U.S Open Champion, surfer, and hugely influential instructor, Paul Schreiner.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
And we're live. Gary, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I just learned that your skateboard had to leave the living room.
Yes, it did. That was a long time ago.
Do tell the story.
Like 12 years ago already.
I didn't know you skateboard.
Well, I don't anymore because it had to. Once it went in the garage,
but like,
it never came out.
Did you do it, or was it like casual, just kind of like push, and you fall?
When I was a little kid, I did skate a little bit just around the neighborhood. And then when I got older, where I was working, like the neighborhood just kept getting bigger. Parking got less. So I would park real far away from work. And I was like, this walk sucks. I want to make up some time here. So I went and bought another skateboard, right? As an adult, threw it in the trunk. I would park my car, pull it out and skate. It was a longboard. So I wasn't doing any tricks or anything, just cruising. And I would skate to work. And then I was like, this is cool. I'm going to do it more. And then, it stayed in the living room. Why would it go anywhere else? And then, at some point
one day,
it was time to go, and it went out. Well, first it went in the basement at that house, and then it went into the,
garbage
into the garage. No, it's still in the garage, and I'll take it down the driveway every once in a while, and I get to look like
you got to take a picture of it. We got to post that.
Okay.
I had no idea.
Yeah. And then when I'll take a picture of the cast on my arm afterwards. But so I don't ride it very much.
I feel like we should do it as a separate episode.
We should.
Just about you.
Once a summer, I'll get on it, when it's like when I'm cleaning out the garage and it's like, oh, there it is. And I'll go for a quick ride, but it's very infrequently these days. So,
well, that's interesting. I learned something new about you.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll get you on it. I'll bring it to the academy.
No,
we'll go out back.
I know my limitations. That would be one of them. I'll stay on the mat.
All right. All right.
We'll stick with
that.
Well,
let's switch it from skateboarding to surfing.
Surfing. Paul, How are you?
I'm great. How are you guys doing?
Fantastic.
We're doing great. So do tell me about these boards behind you. Where is this coming from? Where did this start?
I grew up surfing as a kid. I'm from Santa Cruz, so I grew up boogie boarding, surfing, body surfing, and yeah, it was kind of my main passion and interest until I started, all the way up until I started Jiu Jitsu, and kind of fell out of it or moved away from it a little bit as just training so much in my early 20s, and then just intermittently got back into it, and then again, now it's kind of part of my daily life, more or less. I try to always check the forecast and surf whenever it's good and travel whenever I can. So yeah, I have another pile of boards over in the other corner, but
clearly your girlfriend has nothing against the boards, unlike Gary's.
We still have separate apartments, so actually she has some boards in her place too.
Oh, see, it's a shared hobby. That's why. Yeah.
There you go. Well,
that's why.
We're learning something new.
So there was a point where you were told you'd never surf again, though, right?
More or less. I mean, there's a few sticky points, like kind of bottlenecks, I guess, with injuries. I've talked about it before, but I had a knee injury or two knee injuries when I was a teenager. Tore my ACL on both legs, actually. One was surfing and one was playing rugby. And on my right knee, the surgery, the ACL reconstruction got infected, and that infection spread into my femur and then became systemic and was really bad. So I was in the hospital for a few weeks. And then, as a result, it more or less destroyed my knee, ate up all the soft tissue, all the cartilage, the articular cartilage. And so there was it was a little touch and go for a second because the femur was so weak from the infection, thinking that it was possible that my femur could break if I did anything. So,
That's rough.
Hey, do you mind putting the phone on mute so the thing
Let me
doesn't...
figure out how to do that. One sec. I think it's, I have to turn off the messages because I have it silenced. It's just showing up on the computer.
Oh, okay. No worries.
We'll deal with it.
So wait a minute.
No
So you go through your knee obstacles from surfing, and you choose to do jiu-jitsu, which arguably has more knee problems. That's a good choice. All right, let me ask you this: are you an adrenaline junkie? You go from surfing to rugby, then to jiu-jitsu. There's a pattern that I'm noticing over there.
I mean, I think I'm like a focus. I get really obsessive about things, and especially things that allow you to, to really be in the flow state. So it's, for me in my life, it's been jiu-jitsu, surfing, and fishing. So those are still the kind of the three passions that I have, and the things I've pursued since I was, more or less a teenager, or even before. I started jiu-jitsu when I was 17. I grew up fishing and surfing.
What's the common denominator between those three? Have you noticed one that kind of overlaps between all three of them?
They're all really meditative. They're activities where you can't really think about anything else when you're doing them. They require a lot of focus. Fly fishing is it's almost like hunting. It's you're like stalking a fish and trying to understand its behavior and trying to catch it. And then it's cool as you get to release it afterwards usually. And surfing, I think, is pretty clearly, a flow state that you're in. You're trying to ride all this energy that the ocean's throwing at you, and it's always different. And, you're making all these decisions. I see a lot of parallels, obviously, with jiu-jitsu there, not just in terms of riding the waves, but in, the bank of, understanding and knowledge that you need to even approach it so you can, actually surf or actually, do jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, I was about to ask, do you find a lot of benefits between surfing and jiu-jitsu, just even from, and I know nothing about surfing, so like forgive my ignorance from that perspective, but I'm thinking that a lot of balance and awareness of weight distribution has to be associated with it, which a lot of it is in jiu-jitsu. Am I on the right track here?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'll say too, as a disclaimer, I'm not a great surfer. Like I grew up surfing. I've surfed my whole life, but I'm pretty mediocre. And
Come on, man! You got 6 boards behind you. I thought you were like awesome. What's? Come on.
No, I'm okay. Okay, I like to. I like surfing like heavy waves and feeling that. Feeling that energy. I like to get barreled, but I'm not like a super high performance, ripping surfer or anything, but competent. I don't know. It's almost like for sure there's a crossover. I think there's a lot of psychology or, more like the mental state maybe. I feel like sometimes surfers who get into jiu-jitsu are pretty spazzy, and when jiu-jitsu people get into surfing, they have like way too much base to really like respond and be light on their feet. Like it's almost like how someone who's a really elite striker, it doesn't always translate into jiu-jitsu. What translates, I think, is more the mental side of it, the experience of like how to get good at something, and how to learn from your mistakes, and the learning process. Like I think that translates really well, yet balance and fitness to some degree, but there's something that's there's like a quality to how you respond in surfing that it doesn't quite translate always for jiu-jitsu. I think for most people, I mean, some people like Joel Tudor or something, like, yeah, he can probably speak to that better because he's, world champion in surfing and super high level in jiu-jitsu too. And he's been able to blend the two, but more often than not, I see that really good surfers are kind of spazzy in jiu-jitsu.
I would think the opposite. But
that's what I was about. That's such an interesting. I would think there would be more bleed over here, but I don't know.
We don't surf.
We don't surf. We got nowhere to surf. Some of them had skateboards, but then we were told not to do it. So
it's hard to surf in Illinois.
I think one thing that's interesting that I think about a lot, and I work with a lot of non-competitor hobbyist students too, is that jiu-jitsu is one of the few sports or like physical, activities where I think you get really, really good starting later in life. And I think surfing's on like the really opposite end of the spectrum. Like you can look at someone for 10 seconds and tell that they started surfing in their 20s, not even their 30s or 40s. Like it's just almost impossible to develop that seamlessness and the flow and how your body moves, on a board if you start late.
Is that because of that physical attributes necessary to surf efficiently?
Yeah, maybe. I think it's just you just really need the time, because I think more than anything, it's just it's the time on the surfboard. So, I have seen people get decent who've like, moved to Indonesia for 10 years, like when they're a little older, but, because you figure when you're in the water, you're not catching a wave every 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Like you might surf for a few hours and just, catch 3 or 4 waves. You might fall on those, or surf them for a few seconds. So it's like just to build.
I see what you're saying. So the frequency of your training is spread out across longer period of time. And as a result of it, your progression is much slower versus in jiu-jitsu, you can train any day, any time of the day, and you can really.
And there's so many pathways. I mean, surfing's like endlessly creative too, but in a different way. You're still like, that canvas is still that wave. And if you can't relate to that, then, it doesn't, you might be able to surf it out with your body or boogie board or something and do that. But, riding a surfboard on your feet, I mean, it's kind of a limited vocabulary that you have there. In jiu-jitsu, there's, we know how broad the sport is, how many ways to kind of navigate that there are. So, you can, like me, I just had a knee replacement, so I'm probably not going to be doing like a lot of takedowns for at least a while, at least the medium term. Hopefully I'll be able to get back there. But, jiu-jitsu allows us to play off our back. It allows us to play seated. It allows us to, even play defensively with someone past our guard. And like, we have, all these options and all these different ways to win that we can fit to our body type and our personality and the way we think.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, I have here plenty of students who are in their 40s, 50s, even 60s, and they are very efficiently working through the jiu-jitsu journey without, making these huge sacrifices on their body and wear and tear and all the other things, right? Which allows them essentially to, one, start later, but two, also go much longer and enjoy the path, the journey, the experience, the grind, the learning curve.
Yeah, 100%.
When did this all start for you? When did jiu-jitsu start?
I started, I think I was 17. The first time I trained, I was in Santa Cruz, California, where I'm from. At the gym that I was working out at, they started offering like a jiu-jitsu class. I was a blue belt teaching, and I took a handful of classes there, and then found out that there was an academy in town with a black belt, a really legit black belt, Claudio Franca. And I went to the academy and signed up and trained with Claudio and Garth Taylor, who was like the assistant instructor at the time, who, went on to become a world champion, I believe, at purple and brown belt, and then got second place as, black belt adult. So it was kind of one of the leading, American competitors at the time. And yeah, so we just happened to have a really good school, or I happened to walk into a really good school, and got exposure to a lot of high level jiu-jitsu, got to train a lot with like BJ Penn, for example, when I was really, in the formative years when I was learning as a white and blue belt. And then, I decided I wanted to train more, and I moved to Brazil in 2000, I believe. And then I was there like off and on for 8 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
Did, so training with Claudio and all that, that's, what years are we talking about there?
I think I started in 96 or 97.
Okay. So still really in the beginning of everything, and being on the forefront of it at that point. How was it relating to like everything else that was going on around you? I mean, cause it just seems so, in those mid 90s, everything is popping up. And you're changing your lifestyle for jiu-jitsu. And I was just wondering like what was going on around you at that point? What were people thinking, and how was it affecting you? I
mean, going back to the surf thing, it almost felt like an extension of that. Like I never graduated high school. I did a student exchange thing to New Zealand. And when I came back, my high school had switched over to digital from, analog record keeping. So they had thrown out all the records for former students, even though it just like a year.
For real?
Oh my God.
Yeah. And my high school counselor had retired in that year. Wow. And he was the one I had like worked out the, graduation deal with, where I would do a year abroad and come back and graduate, whatever. So I just came back and took the GED, and then,
Wait a minute. You go to New Zealand, you come back, and like you don't exist.
Yeah. Yeah, they've thrown out all my records. Wow. So, I mean, it didn't really seem like a big deal at the time because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I figured I was going to take a year off anyway before I went to college, and so, I just took a year off, maybe I didn't even take a year off. I started going to the community college and just, kind of chipping away and figuring out what I wanted to do. And, I really enjoyed, being in school and taking classes. So I did that for, I think I was at like the community college for like 3 or 4 years, but I would, like do 2 semesters and then do like a surf trip for a few months. And so it was kind of like the jiu-jitsu just felt like an extension of that.
What made you start jiu-jitsu?
Town lifestyle. What's that?
What when you start jiu-jitsu? In the 96, 97, jiu-jitsu can't be as accessible as it is today. I mean, I started in 2000 and it was like barely existent. And so I can only imagine a few years prior to that, it was probably even less, even in California. But so what made you stumble upon jiu-jitsu? What draws you to it? How do you find it?
I wrestled for 1 year. I wrestled my junior year in high school, and I had a great wrestling coach. And so it was kind of on our radar because we'd watch, those early UFCs and, kind of trying to figure out what Hoist was doing. And, and so I knew I was interested in it. Like at that time, like in high school, I looked around, there wasn't any schools that I could find in town. I mean, I guess in hindsight there was, I just, I didn't find it. And, so I was interested in it. I didn't wrestle well enough to go, sorry about that, to pursue it in college. I wrestled like 3/4 of a season before my student exchange started. And I really enjoyed it. It felt like jiu-jitsu was probably something similar, and tried it, liked it. That was basically it. And it kind of, maybe not initially, because at that time I had, a really tight circle of friends outside jiu-jitsu and no one else trained. But eventually it became like a, kind of my social network, and as well. My friends were all made friends there, and like, you become part of the group, and then it kind of takes on a life of its own. And I wanted to pursue it more. And at that time, it was at the academy, it was really only like one of my instructors, Garth Taylor, that was like pursuing it as a career, or pursuing it professionally, or trying to compete at the highest level. And so I thought the best way to do that would be to move to Brazil. And I love traveling. I love learning new languages. And, I spent a lot of time in Latin America. I spoke Spanish, but I didn't speak Portuguese. My dad's an archaeologist in Central America. So growing up, we'd spend most summers in, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras, southern Mexico. It just kind of, Brazil made sense, I think. I wanted to go check it out, and it ended up being a great experience. I met a lot of my, people that I'm still super close to through surfing there and through jiu-jitsu. So
I would imagine that's like heaven for you, between surfing and jiu-jitsu. I mean, especially at that time.
It was looking back on it, it was pretty magical. Like that era, we were the first. Yeah. There has been a few foreigners who'd gone to train before, like the mid to late 90s, but there was kind of a class of us, Scotty from On the Mat, mm-hmm. Pete DeCleek, Eric Owens, and there's a little crew of us that kind of went initially, and we're all obsessed with jiu-jitsu. And
isn't it funny, like once you get into this jiu-jitsu world, if you will, like people start disappearing from your life, but new people start appealing, and then like in a heartbeat, only people is like people who do jiu-jitsu. Matter of fact, anybody who's outside of jiu-jitsu world was like, I don't know. Like I talked about this on the show so many times. It's like when I meet people outside of jiu-jitsu, I feel like I don't even have connection. Like I don't know. Like I feel I can't even talk to people about anything, because it's like I'm the awkward one. You know what I mean?
Well, there's no frame of reference for them. They don't know what you do. So you start talking about it, and you can see their eyes kind of glaze over, and you're like, all right, this isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
So you got to move on.
Yeah. Well, there was a new person moving into my neighborhood, and we start talking and all that, and they're like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "Well, I have Martial Arts Academy, do jiu-jitsu." And it's like, "Oh, it's like, what do you do?" I was like, "Well, that's what I do."
Right.
Oh, like that guy is like, "What? This is what you do for a living?" I was like, "Yeah."
Yeah, they don't understand it, but oh well, that's their loss.
Listen. 97, you start this thing. Little experience with wrestling. There was some surfing, passion. You travel all around. What's your comparison between the early 90s or late 90s, early 2000s, as far as jiu-jitsu perspective, when you're starting all of this, to today? we're moving 2 decades forward. What's the biggest change that you see in jiu-jitsu community, in jiu-jitsu as a sport, as activity? What's the biggest thing that changed for you?
I mean, just from the outside perspective, I think it was much more of a niche sport then, and it was very much tied, at least, in my experience where I trained, to like self-defense and, Vale Tudo, even though I never fought or anything, but, the jiu-jitsu was always really linked to self-defense and jiu-jitsu for fighting. Mm-hmm. And it was much more of a niche sport. It wasn't like, the culture wasn't as inclusive, it wasn't meant, like jiu-jitsu's for everyone kind of thing. It was, you trained with everyone the first day you walked in the door at the academy. So if, the people that could come back the next day came back, and the people who, didn't have a good experience, which was a lot of them, never came back. So now I think we ease people into that experience a lot more, which I think overall is a good thing, right? It's allowed the sport to expand so much, but it lost a little bit of that quality of feeling like you did something that was, completely outside the experience of like daily life for 99.9% of, people out there.
Is that how you felt in the beginning? Meaning you were achieving things that nobody else does?
Secret society or something. Yeah. It felt great. And especially when you make the commitment that, you're not just doing it as a hobbyist, that like, this is what you're doing. This is who you are. It becomes your identity, like, and you're young, is really, really formative, those formative years. And, you like idolize your coaches and the kind of the stars in the sport. And like, you're just like a sponge trying to learn everything you can, without any real methodology behind it either, and that was like, I think one of the things that jiu-jitsu's helped me with over the last, like, however many years that is that I've trained, is like understanding my learning process and, a methodology to how to teach and how to help people learn, and to recognize like how different people learn. And that's what's made me, I think, a pretty effective teacher.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this, some of that. I want to pick your brain on your teaching strategies. But before we get there, do you remember the first time you got smashed way back in the day?
Yeah, I mean, I remember a lot of those early experiences, but yeah, I think I did pretty good the first few times I trained. Like the people the higher belts that I trained with weren't particularly good or by today's standards. And I was, pretty athletic, and so I did fine. And then when I went to Claudio's school, I trained with a white belt, a skinny white belt, and he, choked me a bunch of times and arm locked me. So yeah. I mean, it happened, many times over the years, but there's been some memorable ones for sure.
Isn't it
training with Marcelo is like really hard on the ego if you
what Matt equalizer.
When you first went down to Brazil, those first couple times, how were you welcomed, or were you welcomed? How were you treated when you're walking into somebody's academy?
It was a mixed bag. I mean, in the beginning, I wasn't really, and part of it was because of this. Like I was still representing Claudio when I was competing. And I try to be upfront about that whenever I, walk into a school. So like, I'm here to visit, like, cause everyone at that time, kind of, if you train there for more than one or two times, there's kind of like the, question if you're going to represent them in competition.
Okay.
And, it was a little bit more, I think, closed off, like team wise then, at least when you were a lower belt. And initially I was like kind of training at a lot of schools. So when you walk in for the first time, I mean, not so different than a lot of academies here too. Like you definitely like have a target on your back. And I really liked that at the time, like because you're getting, someone's A game.
So you saw this as a challenge more than.
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, but I mean, I have to say, I was, especially looking back on it, I think I was really well received. I trained a lot with Gordo, with Hilly and Gracie, at Gracie Baja, at that kind of golden era, Gracie Baja, early 2000s, and then at Gordo's school and Hillian's school. And yeah, I mean, I didn't have many bad experiences. More than anything, I feel like people really went out of their way to help me.
I think
That's great.
I think jiu-jitsu community in general is very welcoming, short of handful, bad apples, if you will, or little rivalries here and there between teams or academies. I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, you traveled by far more than I have, but like I feel like, that there is this freedom of stopping in an academy as long as you're respectful and knowing, some of the just basic points of communication. I think people are very welcoming. They want new people to stop in and kind of and join in and train together.
Yeah, 100%. And now, especially with like how globalized it is, it's an incredible way to travel. Like if you're, to go to a school and, call ahead of time if you can and show up and train. It's like I've made friends kind of all over the world doing that. I don't do it as much anymore because, I train and teach so much. A lot of times now when I travel, I just kind of want to go surf or, go kind of not do jiu-jitsu for a week or something. But, yeah, like as an example, I went to the Dominican Republic to surf like for a short surf trip, like maybe 10 years ago. And when I got to my hotel, there was like a bunch of jiu-jitsu guys waiting for me there, who found out, I guess, from the person that I booked the hotel with that I trained somehow. And then, so they took me to go train and then took me to, a bunch of surf spots, and like, we're still friends. I just visited them with my girlfriend like 2 weeks ago. So
yeah, that's the beautiful part. It was this weekend. I don't remember. Recently, I was wearing jiu-jitsu t-shirt and was, aggressive hugging or whatever, and somebody stopped me. It's like, oh, you train jiu-jitsu? And then conversation starts, like as simple as that. Like I think I really do believe that jiu-jitsu is one of those unique activities where people connect, very easily. And I think it's because of that, these compromised positions that we put ourselves in, and it's very unique, very different than other activities. What is some of the big epiphanies or big changes that you've made from an instructor perspective, from what you've experienced at the beginning of your journey, your learning process of jiu-jitsu to what you do today? Today you teach a lot, quite a bit. And, some consider you one of the best out there, with great knowledge, great ability to relay information. What are the big learning curves for you as an instructor?
I had to start. I mean, I think probably a lot of people in my generation did the same, but I started teaching really early into my jiu-jitsu. Like I started teaching as a blue belt. And then as a purple belt, I was, teaching a few times a week. And then, I tried to get away from teaching a little bit as a brown belt just to focus on training. But yeah, and then, so I've been teaching jiu-jitsu since also probably about 2000. So for, over 20 years. And, in the beginning, it was like more about showing moves and, everything was kind of siloed. And now I don't want to say it's principle based. I think everyone says they teach conceptually or principle based, but I feel like I try to teach much more cohesively, and I'm better. There's a lot of ways to bring people into jiu-jitsu. There's a lot of entry points, and I feel like different people, different personalities might relate to one entry point, better than another. But overall, in the big picture, I don't know how much it really matters exactly. Like the first, as long as you get excited enough to want to keep coming back, and you kind of start to see the big picture. I feel like I've gotten better at transmitting that big picture and getting people stoked on it, getting people to see the, like kind of the essence of the art beyond, techniques that work, which you also have to, when you're teaching new students, like that's part of it, right? You want to teach them things that they train and work, and that they feel working. But yeah, I go back to something that Marcelo's coach Fabio Gurgel said, which, it's really simple, but like jiu-jitsu is an art where two people start on their feet and it ends when one person taps. And, it's kind of from the beginning, like understanding that the spirit of the art is like protecting yourself, controlling your opponent, in a progressive manner that leads to a submission. And that's like jiu-jitsu without a submission is, like pointless in my opinion,
You talk about big picture. You talk about cohesive approach to jiu-jitsu. You mentioned some of those terms. What does that mean to you? What is the big picture of jiu-jitsu in your mind?
I was just referring, in terms of technicality of like actually like the not siloing the art into like a series of moves, but understanding like why guard is important, or why the mount is a good position, why we have to know takedowns, and why we can't just sit guard. I mean, eventually, yeah, if you want to compete and you don't want to do takedowns, we have pathways to win like that, but you need to learn takedowns. You need to be, I want to transmit like a complete art picture of jiu-jitsu, and a jiu-jitsu that moves forward and ends in the submission. I think that, we're very focused at Marcelo's on teaching control. Like we're very like positional focused academy, but if you look at Marcelo's jiu-jitsu, I think he's one of the best examples we have of control in jiu-jitsu, and understanding like how the positions fit together in service of controlling our opponent to find a submission. But you see the best jiu-jitsu practitioners at control are the ones with the most submissions. Like the submissions come from control in jiu-jitsu. The situations arise where we can use our opponent's reactions against them, because that's in my opinion what jiu-jitsu is like we use their strategic and energetic and technical reactions against them. That's what the art is. It starts from instinctive reactions and then moves to trained and technical reactions, and then strategic and even like emotional reactions in the fight. But if you look at like Marcelo's the great example, or Roger, who have the highest submission rates, who are known as finishers, they have the best control. If you look now it would be Gordon, like Wicked Gordon's control. That's why he's submitting everyone. That's why.
Essentially what you're saying is that submission is a result of the control. It cannot really come ahead of it. First, you need to gain you need to be in charge of that particular situation, and the submission will come as a follow-up to it. Am I right on that?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the architecture is control.
Yeah,
is positional control, and then the submission. The submission doesn't have to come after, but it can come before even the control. But as long as that architecture is understood, and I just look at. I think that probably the best, in my opinion, the best jiu-jitsu in the gi right now is Tynan. And he's, he has the best control in probably not just in that division, but across the divisions. And you see, he submits a lot of his opponents, and I bet that he's going to, with more experience, he's going to be submitting just about everyone.
How do you relay that big picture of jiu-jitsu? You talk about deeper understanding of what guard is, deeper understanding what control is, not just focusing on steps, but having this larger and broader view of what one is trying to accomplish and see it ahead. How do you relay that to a new student? They have no idea. Jiu-jitsu is so deep. It is so complex.
It is. You can't, there's no way to express everything, all at once. You're going to overwhelm someone. They're not going to learn anything. So, we have a relative, at the academy, I guess I would parse the answer into like whether I'm working with a student one-on-one or whether I'm teaching group classes. And because, the approach definitely changes. I try, as much as I'm probably known for explaining things to death, but I try not to over explain. I try to let people feel the position, try to teach in my mind the right techniques or in the right order, right? Like the techniques that are examples of principles without even talking about that. For example, I'm reworking a lot of our basics curriculum right now to include a lot more leg entanglement and single leg X, which, I think is, super important, super important way to establish control and a lot more effective for beginner students than, a lot of the ways that we came up with in starting to learn open guard. So kind of teaching positions that they're going to be able to grasp, that they're going to be able to have immediate success with, that are not incongruent with self-defense in the beginning, because I think that self-defense is where the art came from, right? And it really gives the kind of mental architecture to new students to understand why you do certain things. And then personally, I enjoy sport jiu-jitsu a lot more than, focusing on self-defense all the time. But I think it's super important to have that grounding in self-defense in the beginning, because it gives you a base that you can take anywhere. For one, like if students who might quit training, which is going to be a lot of people, it's going to give them, something that, a base level of kind of muscle memory and retention that can help them, if they ever need it, which, I've had dozens and dozens of students over the years who've come and said like something that, we taught in class, like saved them in a real life situation. So I think it has to, in the beginning, like teaching techniques that are illustrative of bigger principles, but that are super effective and are grounded in like the root of the art, which, in my opinion, is self-defense first.
With jiu-jitsu growing, hold on, let me ask this. With jiu-jitsu growing so much and being so accessible today, it's very easy for average student, brand new student, to really ignore the self-defense component. Matter of fact, many do think that self-defense is slowly fading away from jiu-jitsu, sport jiu-jitsu, because how accessible it is everywhere, all the time on our phones, right? And you talk about the importance of it. How do you keep students focused on keeping the self-defense alive, if you will, quote unquote, versus focusing on some of these dynamic, flashy, fun, entertaining positions that sport might provide?
One, I try not to make those in opposition to each other. And I'm hopefully, if students are excited about like wanting to learn a berimbolo as a white belt, I think there's worse things, and the core of self-defense that I like to teach is pretty limited in scope. It's understand, and it's to also illustrate the principles, you know, in jiu-jitsu, closing the distance, understanding where you're safe and where you're not safe, how to frame to create distance from the bottom position, how to clinch, why reversals and sweeps are important, why maintaining, you know, top position and not jumping for submissions and losing position are important. Again, it provides like a strategic architecture for students, but the repertoire of moves and techniques is pretty small. Like I teach like how to close distance, a couple of basic takedowns from a clinch, also, you know, single leg and double leg, basic hip throw, headlock defense sequences, because I think those are super important for later for, you know, they teach the mechanics for how to get in the back, for half guard, right? Like someone, if you look at the basic, headlock escapes on the ground, I mean, that's all basically half guard positions, right? And how to orient your body and position yourself to, you know, and I teach a lot of half guard to beginners too, because I think it's a very easy position for them to find success with. I also think that half guard, probably not for beginners, but half guard has a much bigger place in self-defense than you know, traditional kind of jiu-jitsu would say. Like if you look at Damian Maia or something, who took like almost zero punishment his whole career, you know, from half guard, and even switched from playing more closed guard to playing half guard in, you know, against the best in the world in the UFC. Like you see its utility. It's just really easy to get to a good position from there. And especially against people who, I mean, Damian told me he played half guard at the UFC because those guys his opponents aren't good at passing the guard and not getting swept. Like it's easy to sweep them. And in the same sense, if you take someone, you know, in a self-defense scenario who's untrained, it's really easy to sweep them, you know, coming up from an underhook. So I think it's a situation that, you know, that beginners can grasp really well, just as a point of difference from like the, you know, the I guess traditional self-defense techniques. What else there?
Well, there's different. It's different.
I kind of spaced out on the question.
No, you're fine. It's definitely unquestionable that the evolution of jiu-jitsu continues, right?
Yeah.
I think we had a huge pivot points in the past, you know, when IBJJF started growing and other things, and UFC obviously, and there are these like pillars which make these drastic turns. But no matter what, the sport continues evolving and growing and getting not only bigger, but also more complex. And in my mind, at least, half guard is one of the most dominant positions there can be. Such a versatile spot where you can really change directions and use it to your advantage, unlike many other positions there are in jiu-jitsu. Gary, you had something to say?
Well, it was along the lines of what you said, but I was just wondering if you see that self-defense aspect dying in a way. Or just getting pushed aside as the sport grows and becomes more popular.
Maybe. I was thinking about, someone asked me on a podcast, I can't remember which one, but probably like 8 years ago about that. And I wasn't quite sure how to answer, but I think probably, you know, maybe it is dying a bit for most students because, you know, there was a lot of people who trained in my era, whatever, when I started, is like, you know, we have 1 day a week where it's training with slaps or training with boxing gloves, or maybe 2 days a week. So the jiu-jitsu might not have been as sophisticated, but you actually trained it. Mm-hmm. And I think probably most schools have gone into more of a sport specific way, route. And that's obviously, it's evolved so much. But on the other hand, I think that the self-defense focused schools are much, much better now than they were then. You know, like Dave Camarillo's self-defense program, you know, he's like coaching special operations, and now he's like working in stunts, and he has, you know, elite level judo and you know, half Gracie black belt, and like the programming and the approach to self-defense that he's been able to put together, I think is like so much more technical, so much easier to learn than anything that, I was taught in the late 90s. Also, I think for traditional jiu-jitsu, like the way that Huron and Hinner teach and the program they run, I think is impeccable, like for self-defense and for self-defense that's really accessible to anyone, like that, any age, fitness level, like people can get right in the stream of things and learn and make work, so I think that the outliers, like the schools that focus on that, are better than anything that existed when I started training. But overall, the jiu-jitsu's taken a quantum leap in in sport and in technicality, and it makes sense that it's fun. Like that's why most of us end up sticking with it, that that's kind of the direction that most academies go.
And I think also the purpose of jiu-jitsu has changed too. If you look at jiu-jitsu 20 years ago, it's very much so vale tudo-like. It was very much so fighting-like. It was very much so survival and attack from that perspective, which put this self-defense component in the very much so life situation, right? You needed to know how to protect yourself. Versus I feel like today, jiu-jitsu is a little bit more on the casual side. Even the sport component of it, right? We have 50-year-olds, 40-year-olds, doctors, lawyers, mechanics. Everybody is joining jiu-jitsu. They want to have this sport experience without getting punched in the face, without getting destroyed because they got to go to work next day. So I think this self-defense necessary parts are kind of shifting away from just the evolution of jiu-jitsu. But at the same time, what you just mentioned, Paul, is there's this separate component that's being magnified for law enforcement, for service individuals, for, military and so on. And there are some of these guys like Hannah and Hurian and the Gracie guys, and then, guys in Miami,
Pedro,
Valente brothers, right? There's few of them all throughout the country, but the level of their expertise is out through the roof because nobody else does it. And they become experts in the quote unquote self-defense component of jiu-jitsu. Maybe not.
And I just add really specifically Dave Camarillo to that list because, I think what he's doing is like very different, that there's, he's an outlier. There's only one of him, right? Where the, elite level, international level judo, a lot of experience working with special operations and bringing it, coaching, for UFC title holders. So he being able to bring all that experience about what works. He just has such a ridiculous work ethic too. Like he boxes and kickboxes and wrestles and does judo and trains jiu-jitsu and still like a lot of and shoots and everything else. And a lot of times he does all of those every day still, and he's in his 40s,
Man, we got to get him on this show.
I mean, you really should. He's not to mention his arm locks, right, which he's known for.
Yeah.
Even Marcelo said Dave has special skills with arm locks. Like it's different if you haven't trained with him before.
Speaking of that, as we go through this journey over years and decades and so on, and we start teaching, we start developing our own styles, the quote unquote expertise that, every single one of us kind of, one prefers, two, we become really good at it, like how do you, in your mind, how does one develop this niche that they really like? Like you talk about his arm locks, others have a back takes, others have, guillotines and so on. Like we all have the little things, how does one become really good at this one thing?
I mean, I think it just starts with like aesthetics almost. Like you have to think something you're attracted to something. And that gives you the drive to keep training it and to figure it out for your body type and see, in your vision of the way things fit together, like to see its place.
Almost like an obsession.
Like an obsession. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think a lot of us are somewhere, on the, OCD or OCDP spectrum.
You don't have to beat around the bush. We all crazy, okay? We all nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's kind of where it comes from. And then we all have our ways of conceptualizing the big picture, and we see that thing that we got good at, and we can start making connections. And jiu-jitsu is really like about, connecting things, connecting our positions, connecting our positions with our opponent's reactions, guiding our opponent's reactions. Like, Marcelo's, he wasn't the first person to see, to see how important the back was in jiu-jitsu, right? Like that's the paradigm that he came into was also, I think, like, in the positional ladder is the back and mount were always at the top. I know that's what I was taught, in the mid 90s, but, his insight essentially was like the back, and the way he explains it, again, I'm paraphrasing, but, the back is just, it's too big for someone to hide and try to win simultaneously. Like you can hide your neck. It's like physically smaller. You can hide an arm or your hand or your elbow, but you can't hide your back, because the only way you can hide your back is to lay it flat on the ground, right? Like you can't hide your back and go forward and try to win a fight. So there's always a way, like if you can get behind an elbow, or if you can, get the back off the floor, like there's a way to get to the back. And so that was the kind of one of the central insights to his jiu-jitsu, I think.
What a brilliant mind. Sometimes I wish we could have had more access to to all of those brains, because the perspective on jiu-jitsu would be completely different. Listen, before we start wrapping this up, I want to ask you something. Connected reaction. You have full series on BJJ Fanatics about this. What does that mean to you? What does connected reaction mean in your mind?
I think the idea of jiu-jitsu being action reaction, but that our reaction is connected to our opponent's action, right? But it's also connected to what came before and what came after in terms of our own action, right? Like the Fabio Gurgel again would say, the shortcut to learning jiu-jitsu is every time you learn a move, think of the move, what came one step before, and then what comes one step after. And so that way you always learn three things instead of one, right? And our idea is always to connect our jiu-jitsu and integrate it. And it's in service of working towards the submission being the end goal, of going through and escalating and progressively more and more control until we get to that submission. So connected reaction is just the idea of that reaction being connected to our opponent and also being connected to our own actions. And, also in my mind, it's our action is that we have to be connected to ourselves in order to act. I think we've all had the experience of, telling our body just not doing what we're not responding, not moving when we see things. And so we have to, develop this relationship to our own body, our mind body, and be in that moment in a way where we can move and we can react and we can be in that zero state and react in a connected way to our opponent.
Isn't it mind blowing when you watch students? At least I've noticed that the awareness of what we think is happening, but what our body actually does, how disconnected we are often, and then more you train, more you explore, that gap is closing, and we find more success. And it's all about connecting the mind to our body.
100%. And it's crazy too, where you have students that walk in and they have that already.
Absolutely. You know, like you watch them, it's like first week. Damn. Have you trained before?
Is that something you're born with, or is that something that develops maybe from other sports or other activities?
I think it develops from like how we grow up and how we play and stuff, right? Like we're so, you know, in this, we play video games too much and we're sitting in chairs all day. Like, we're not outside like playing in the, you know.
So is the uncoordinated kid uncoordinated from his physicality, or is he uncoordinated from
I think his culture?
His culture and his surroundings. Yeah.
Gary, no more video games for you.
Those days that went with the skateboard. that guy.
It's just kind of like it's not even that they're uncoordinated. It's that like there's a barrier that's like there's a block in the synapse between, you know, telling your body to move and it moving, and it takes a while to get out of our own way in jiu-jitsu, just to be able to move and to react. And, you know, again, like Marcelo, I've had a lot of really, I've been lucky to have a lot of great teachers and mentors in the sport, but, you know, I've spent the most time with Marcelo. I've been training with him off and on since 2004. And, you know, his perspective is like for new students, like the most important thing is just to move, is to try things and to go through all the positions every time you train. And so you can really like lay out that landscape and you get in the habit of like, you know, I mean, I've fallen into that trap as a teacher, but, you know, I hopefully I've moved past it, but you know, it's like you over explain like one niche to like a new student. Like I structure the beginner classes in that kind of survey, way a little bit more. Like we will go deep in on a topic, but it's always connected to, you know, other positions. It's not just, you know, in an advanced class, we'll spend a month working on like half guard or whatever, one bolo or a mount or something. But in the beginning class, everything has to connect, and we have to kind of develop those transitions and build out that map.
Yeah, as you were saying, dig deep in, but bring it back to surface every single time to have this perfect view of everything that's happening, yet you have these samples of things.
Well,
right?
that's when the beginners, they have those epiphanies or those aha moments that we talk about a lot, where it's like, oh, now I see why we do A and how it flows into B or C or whatever. And I think that's super important in a beginner's curriculum.
Yeah, there's nothing more refreshing than seeing those epiphanies. You see just like their eyes light up. It's like, yes,
yeah.
Go.
Or even in a kid's class where they're like, you know, a kid will be on mount, and I don't know why they always try and pin their opponent's arm down with their knee. You know, that first thing you do when you're wrestling around as a kid. And I'm trying to break a few kids of that, and it's like, just go to S mount. And they're like, I don't know how. I can't just push his shoulder. Oh yes. Oh. I can just push his shoulder over and go to S mount. It's like, there you go. Yeah. And it's the same. I don't think there's much different with adults either, when they have those moments of, oh, I can just do this. And then it all starts connecting.
Sometimes I think that adults actually have a harder time learning jiu-jitsu because of the overthinking and over processing information. I feel like kids are like a clean slate. You know, I mean, the less experience they have allows them to be more open-minded about things. I could be wrong on this. I don't know. So much.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that.
Yeah, so much beautiful stuff in jiu-jitsu. Paul, before we start wrapping this up, we've been at this for an hour, just for the sake of, you know, being honorable of your time. But before we wrap this up, what we do end of each episode, we have a question from a person or from the guest who was here before you, the episode before you. He asked the question, not knowing that you will be answering it. Gary's going to take a lead on this. This is going to be interesting.
Yeah, I hope it's not too rough, this one. But Neil Melanson was here just the other day, and he wants to know, what was your worst day on the mats?
Coming from Neil.
Yeah.
There's been a couple, but like, I mean, there's been bad days, like injuries and stuff. I think I have like three answers, but you know, the getting injured is terrible.
Yeah.
Anytime you injure someone else, I think is even worse than injuring yourself.
I agree.
And then I remember it's happened twice. So at two different academies, but like one time, like both times I was driving home. I think after surfing, maybe both of these occasions too. And it was like right when you start getting sick, but I didn't realize I was coming down with the flu. I was just thought I was just tired from having a long day. And I was driving past a school, a tough school that had, for years, like invited me to come by and, and train when I could. I think I was a purple belt, and I was like, okay, today's the day, I'll stop in. And I was feeling tired, but I didn't realize like that night I came down with like a severe flu, like after I trained, but like literally everyone in the academy beat me. Like the four stripe, the white belts beat me, the blue, the kid. I went on trained with a kid, and it was like, I had beat like I'd had a few matches with kind of their top student, and I'd always beat him, and he was there and he beat me, and like everyone in the academy beat me. So that was a rough day. And yeah, then the other time that happened was with same exact scenario. I was like, didn't realize until afterwards that I was getting sick, and I stopped in to visit Jake Jake Shields, and him and Gilbert were getting ready for fights like in Japan. And so then like they suckered me into like putting the small gloves on and like training, and just smashed me. Yeah, it was terrible. Yeah, I remember like Gilbert picking me up off the wall and walking me to the middle of the mat.
Speaking of rough days, has it ever crossed your mind to quit jiu-jitsu?
No, it hasn't. But it's crossed my mind that I might have to. I had a knee replacement. Like I had a total knee replacement 6 months ago. Like I haven't trained. I did positional training one day last week, but that was the first day I've actually like trained jiu-jitsu in probably 9 months. I had the surgery 7 months ago, and then like it had just gotten so bad it escalated super quickly that the last two, I went from being pretty good at surfing and training twice a day, in, I don't know, like October of 2020, was it 2022 now? October 2021 to like by December, I was unable to train and pretty much unable to surf. And then I had the knee replacement on February 8th. So this whole year has just been rehab. And it's like, in the beginning, it's kind of touch and go. Like you don't know if you are going to have a good result, like if you're going to get the mobility back, so it's been super challenging this year. Not doing jiu-jitsu, not even teaching for, the first 5 or 6 months. So I'm just kind of getting back in the swing of things now. So the first 3 months I was kind of, not sure if I was going to be able to come back and teach and train again. Now I think I expect that I'll be training at, a higher level than I was, a year or two ago within another 6 months. So it's feeling really good.
Well, I wish you the best wishes as far as the recovery is concerned. I've been there more than once as far as knee injuries and knee surgery. So I know exactly what you're going through. Nothing worse than being off the mat, especially when it's out of your control. So, recover well. We'll be watching you from the sidelines. If anybody wants to connect with you, and anybody wants to reach out to you, are you accessible on social media? And any listeners want to connect with you in regards to this episode?
Yeah, sure. The only social media I have is Instagram, but it's Paul Schreiner JJ, and it's SCHREINER. So Paul Schreiner JJ on Instagram, and you can message me there, and I always get back to people. So
beautiful. Well, thanks for being here with us the last hour or so. Thanks for sharing all the wisdom, great stories, and your experiences from jiu-jitsu, Gary.
Yeah, thanks for everything. Appreciate you doing this. I really appreciate everything that you're doing out there, and great luck with the rehab and getting back on the mats. I didn't realize it was it was that recent and that bad. So good luck with everything. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Beautiful.
All right. Later, Paul.
All right. Thanks, man. Peace.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.